Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and delighted to have this opportunity for a dialogue with the Premier. It's the first opportunity since September 18th. And interested about the conversation that has just happened between the Leader of the Official Opposition and the Premier. And I think the question that I asked in response to the throne speech in December was around that election call was really the question of what British Columbians deserved. And did they deserve better? Did they deserve more than a caretaker government in the months where we saw the cases rising in the second wave of a global pandemic? There's been a lot of really, I think, very important conversations and discussions around decisions that are made, around words, around collaboration, cooperation, working together versus actions and outcome and what that's played out as. And I think that given the 3.5 years prior to the election call, there were countless daily examples of collaboration, not just between the government caucus and our caucus, but between all of the caucuses in this House. It was celebrated, not only in response to the collaboration around COVID, but celebrated in sessions prior to that, where there had been unanimous consent in this House around enormous initiatives, like the passing of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, where private members' bills were coming forward, being debated and passed in this House, where amendments were being made to bills, as this place should function. And what happened in the wake of that collaboration, and as the Leader of the Opposition has pointed out, the polling, the presentation of Stronger BC, was a choice, a political choice. And what I find fascinating in the months that have followed that political choice, which is absolutely understandable in the system that we have that encourages political parties to make those kinds of political choices, because our system is really geared towards power, not collaboration. 3 minority governments across Canada went to elections during the pandemic. One of the premiers said, well, I saw how it worked out in the other provinces, so I think I'll do the same thing, because the parties were motivated to have more power and less collaboration, because a minority government depends on collaboration. So it's been an interesting conversation. I think it would just be fine, really, to own it. Yeah, this is the political system we're in. It's first past the post. It provides false majorities. It provides enormous power. And that's what we wanted. When the Premier says we wanted to put politics behind us, we wanted a strong mandate, that's what this system provokes. And from my point of view, this system and the way we do things, particularly under majority governments, does not meet the needs of the people that we serve. Because there are 87 representatives in here committed to serving their constituents, who bring ideas and initiatives every day in hopes of serving better. And collaboration actually makes it better. People were very happy with the minority government. So lots of talk around working together, as has been pointed out by the Leader of the Opposition. My first question to the Premier is what does he envision working together? What does that look like under this new majority government? And can he speak to specific initiatives and efforts that he has taken to create that climate of working together.
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I welcome the Leader of the Third Party's participation in this committee debate. With respect to the first past the post system, she and I and her colleagues stood side by side encouraging British Columbians to change the electoral system in British Columbia, the third time that's been tried in this century. Regrettably, the public had a different view than she and I and the member for Saanich North and the Islands, and so we have a first past the post system. So be that what it may, that seems to be the will of the public. We have amended bills this Parliament. The member sitting right behind you assisted in making a bill better in this place. So that's a tangible example of collaboration that continues what had been a positive working relationship with all sides of the House at the beginning of the pandemic. With respect to other initiatives, the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions has reached out to both leaders of the two opposition parties to start the process of collaborating on what's going on in British Columbia, what's happening in the communities that are represented by members on that side of the House to better understand where we can make progress. These are steps that are not as seismic as the steps that we took together during a minority parliament. I will certainly agree with the member on that, but I do not for a minute dismiss the potential for all of us in this place to come together, and is in fact integral to how I'm trying to direct our Executive Council to listen to other people that you wouldn't necessarily listen to engage in broadening the tent so that the public has a better representation in this place and the outcomes that we are able to achieve because of that collaboration. And I know in the heat of partisanship we get worked up. When integrity is brought into question, all of us are heated because we all come here with the best of intentions. We all come here with a clean slate designated by our communities to come here and represent their interests. And I fully intend to keep doing that with all members of this House to the best of my ability.
Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the two examples that the Premier just pointed out, the amendments to a bill. My colleague worked very hard to point out those flaws in that bill, and yes, it was amended. That's not an initiative that the Premier took. My question really is to the Premier, as the leader of the government, as the leader of his caucus, and briefings are, I think, a bare minimum of expectations in this House. Briefings are a matter of course and should be expected to continue as such. Specifically, beyond the words in the mandate letters and the words in here, I'm asking the Premier this because the reality is the table for collaboration needs to be set by the people with power. The Leader of the Official Opposition and I, we have been presenting opportunities, ideas, initiatives, ways to collaborate over and over. Quite a significant amount, in fact, for only being into the second session that we've had. And they have been rebuffed. On the health emergency that has been ongoing for over 5 years, that is claiming the lives of 6 people a day in British Columbia, what is provoking us and I expect our colleague to call for that collaboration, is because building consensus on issues that require some political ambition is really important. There need to be some very significant steps taken if we're going to stop people from dying every single day from a toxic drug crisis. Having all three parties, all three leaders say, we are all in agreement that these steps need to be taken with urgency, depoliticizes those decisions, gives the government political cover to take the necessary steps to stop people from dying every day. And so it's not just, we want a briefing, it is, we want to give you the capacity to take some pretty enormous steps. And so my question again, Mr. Chair, is to the Premier, specifically, what has he done to set that table for collaboration, and specifically on the toxic drug crisis in this province that is a devastating reality? Will he agree that on that kind of emergency, on the scale that it's at, bringing together all three parties is actually an important, if not an essential step?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I thank the member for her questions. And the toxic drug supply, the deaths of British Columbians in unacceptable numbers has been an ongoing crisis for half a decade. I participate in conferences with other jurisdictions. We were the first to have a minister dedicated to daily managing these challenges by having a Minister of Mental Health and Addictions. There were none when that happened. Now there are three. There's a minister in Ontario, and there is a minister in Manitoba. And I suspect this is going to continue right across the country, because this is not just a British Columbia issue, it is a national issue and indeed a national shame. And that's why I followed the lead of the national police chiefs and called on the federal government to decriminalize possession, simple possession, for personal use, so that we could start to destigmatize. And these are issues that all of us agree on in this House. There's no need for a committee to be struck for us to agree that we need to decriminalize possession of opioids for personal use. We need to ensure that we're increasing budgets for paramedics and other frontline workers. We've all agreed to that through supporting the budgets that have been put forward by the Minister of Health, the Minister of Mental Health, as well as others in this place. But if we're going to turn this around, we need to start by having the door opened, and that is exactly what the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions did when she responded to the two leaders, saying, let's get together, let's have a briefing, and let's figure out where we go from here. That's the setting of the table for the collaboration that the member's asking for. A committee of the legislature is not the only way that we can collaborate. I recall in the last Parliament that the committees were meeting regularly, and it was taxing for some members, and they dropped off those committees because there was too much work to do. That's not to say that we can't find a way to invigorate those, but let's start first and foremost by getting the table set, by talking to the minister, talking to her staff, figuring out all parties in this House, by the two leaders sitting down with her, where do we want to go from here? That's what we offered up, and I'm disappointed that the two parties are not prepared to accept that.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I think it's important to not suggest that the two parties are not willing to accept briefings. The two parties are asking for something beyond that. The toxic drug crisis, which is claiming so many lives and is a health emergency, yes, decriminalization, I think we have agreement on, but what I didn't hear the Premier speak about, which is what health experts, advocates, Dr. Henry have all noted, which is essential to actually preventing deaths, is a regulated, accessible, safe supply for people. And we've made some strides in that, but it's nowhere near what it's going to need to be in order to prevent the number of deaths that we're seeing. There are many communities in British Columbia right now where there aren't safe injection sites, overdose prevention sites. It's a health emergency, but the infrastructure there to prevent deaths is not meeting the urgency of the health emergency. So I think there's much more that could be done. And I think that the collaboration is a way to do it. I'm going to go to some comments that the Premier has made about where we are, and again about his decision to have an election, that we want to get, as he says, he says we have to face the challenge. We have the challenges that we are facing. He needed a strong mandate for 4 years. Needed to put the politics behind. And he's, in the last few days, talked about, we're getting near to the end of COVID and things are getting back to normal. He said there's a sense of excitement that the worst is behind us. The vaccine program is rolling out. We're meeting our targets. We're meeting the criteria. In the next number of weeks, I'm hoping that government, sorry, I've lost my thread here. I'm hoping we can get back to something more resembling regular. But unfortunately, and this is where we were a year ago when we were talking about building back better, there was significant acknowledgement that what we didn't want was just to get back to regular. We have a climate emergency, we have biodiversity collapse, we have inequality at untenable levels in this province, in this country, growing around the world, and it's gotten worse because of COVID. We have a housing crisis that has gotten worse because of COVID. And so my question to the Premier really is, given the not particularly bold legislative agenda from this session, what is this vision? What is his vision for where he wants to take this province from this place we're at right now? And is it just getting back to regular?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And I believe, through you to the member, that British Columbians can want to get back to something resembling normal and also think big and bold. And that's why we've launched the largest childcare undertaking in our province's history. That's why, with respect to poverty reduction, we We lifted income assistance and disability pensions by the largest amount ever to happen. That's also why we've legislated GHG targets. That's why we've disaggregated industrial emissions to include oil and gas in one place and other industrial emissions in another place so that we can better manage and regulate these things going forward. So the vision for British Columbia is laid out, in my mind, quite thoroughly and exhaustively in the mandate letters of the ministers that sit with me at the Executive Council. And our job is to try and get people back to where they are comfortable with their health and well-being within their family unit, within their community, and within the province. And at the same time, talk about those bold initiatives that she and I, the member and I, often talked about in the previous administration. I don't believe those are exclusive. I think that both of those things can happen at the same time. There's a whole bunch of people that desperately want to do what they were doing a year ago, and that would be sufficient for a period of time. So let's get to that spot, and then we can proceed, and we are proceeding concurrently with all these other initiatives. We haven't missed a beat on poverty reduction, bringing forward initiatives. We haven't missed a beat on collaborating with the federal government, in fact, encouraging the federal government to mirror the work we're doing on childcare that's going to lead to a significant investment in the not-too-distant future that will transform the workplace for women, that will ensure that our children are getting early childhood education, not just babysitting. These are all exciting initiatives. They are bold, and I'm excited about the future.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I know the Premier brings up, for example, he mentioned climate just now, and yet getting back to normal, it appears to be that normal has become that this province is massively subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. Yesterday's report from Stand.Earth found that the NDP has doubled oil and gas subsidies since 2017, and that by 2023, this government plans to spend almost $1.8 billion on fossil fuel subsidies. To the south of us, the United States is eliminating fossil fuel subsidies altogether, replacing them with clean energy incentives. And I know that the Premier will mention Clean BC and the collaborative work that was done with the BC Green Caucus and the former leader. However, there is a giant LNG-sized gap in Clean BC and in meeting those emissions targets. And that is fueled by fracking in the Northeast, which is heavily subsidized by this government, far more than it was subsidized by the previous government. Subsidized to the extent that the amount that taxpayers are providing to oil and gas subsidies far exceeds the revenues that this government sees on its books from oil and gas. So is that, Honourable Chair, the normal, the regular that we want to get back to? And can this Premier speak to the urgency that so many people, particularly young people, feel about needing to take concrete, bold steps on climate action and stop funding the industries that are driving climate change?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Firstly, I want to say that I've been advised that the Green Caucus has welcomed the overture to sit down with the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions. I'm grateful for that, and I'm hopeful that the official opposition will follow suit, and we can get back to that collaborative place to have the cooperation that the public will see in this House that will reflect how we want to see our communities respond to that challenge. With respect to the data the member talks about, we are, as she knows, conducting a review of all of the incentives or subsidies or through the royalty review that's currently underway. Some of the dollars that she refers to are actually incentives to reduce emissions. We won't be shutting down the oil and gas sector next week. That's the conventional wisdom of almost everybody. We need to transition away from where we are to where we want to get to. And we are of one mind on how we do that as quickly as possible, but quickly as possible is not instantaneously. It will take a process to reduce our dependence as individuals and communities on natural gas, for example. In the Lower Mainland, over 1 million people depend on natural gas. It won't disappear tomorrow. And that's just in British Columbia. 5 million souls here in a sea of 7 billion souls. We had a discussion today with Mark Carney, the former Governor of the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England, and also now Special Advisor to the EU, and I think to the Prime Minister of the UK. Very compelling, just written a fantastic book. I commend it to your attention if you haven't had a chance to look at it. And so here we have a banker, national banker for Canada and for the UK, saying without any hesitation that we need to rapidly move to a different way of doing business. That is the view and vision of the province of British Columbia, and we're going to do that by collaborating with new energy alternatives, by making sure that those that are in the sector that want to transition to cleaner, more efficient, more effective sources of energy to power the world, because that's what we're talking about here. This isn't about little tiny things. This is about a global economy. So to have someone of Carney's stature, not just here in Canada, but internationally, leading a crusade to change the way industry looks at these things. The numbers he talked about were staggering in terms of the trillions of dollars being invested in alternatives by those very companies that have been the bedrock of the fossil fuel industry. So they are transitioning. So if the fossil fuel industry is starting to make that transition, certainly to goodness, the rest of Canada, the rest of North America can do that as well. I'm heartened by the changes in the United States, the administration there, most assuredly. The Glasgow iteration of COP is almost upon us. Certainly Minister Heyman will be attending on behalf of, or pardon me, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change will be attending on our behalf. I may well go. I've been talking to the Governor of Washington about subnational units like BC, Washington, and others, forming a bloc to go to COP and say to national governments, this is where we need to go. The sooner you get on board, the better we'll all be. That's the agenda that I'm on, and I hope and I know I'll have the support of the two members from the third party.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I thank the Premier for his response. However, I talk a lot about the kind of foundational pillars of democratic systems, and that's trust. And what erodes trust is cynicism. And what can create cynicism is when governments say one thing but do the opposite. And so to speak about the absolute need, we agree on this, to be transitioning away from fossil fuels, but at the same time, increasing the propping up of that industry in this province with taxpayer money says one thing, does another. And to the comments about, some of those subsidies go to electrifying the industry, the reality is it still results in fracking, enormous volumes, and it is it goes contrary to the polluter pays model, which is taxpayers are paying industry to be cleaner, just as taxpayers have been on the hook with this industry in particular, the fracking industry, on the cleanup costs, because after all the money's made and they get out of town, they leave the wells behind. Realizing how close we are to the end, I'm going to turn to one last topic here, which is our environment, old growth, species at risk, an issue that is clearly very important to a lot of British Columbians. The Minister of Environment no longer has the mandate to create a species at risk or biodiversity legislation, which was part of the Confidence and Supply Agreement, and has disappeared from the mandate at a time when we're seeing massive biodiversity loss around this world. the notion that we are not going to be proactive, more proactive on protecting biodiversity and habitats for species at risk is alarming. And in terms of old growth, which has been dominating the news, much of the input that we've certainly gotten, and I'm sure the Premier has heard it, is around protection of old growth in this province. People are very, very concerned about this. And we have a precedent that's been set in the Premier's riding. Indigenous nations have a pathway to stewarding and conserving their lands, to negotiate better economic terms than what is typically offered to them in so-called benefits agreements. But for decades, there have been calls for renewal of the forestry industry and policies in this province, gone unheeded. And right now, there is another nation that's calling for immediate deferral of all logging in their territories, and that's Squamish Nation. So my question to the Premier, it's very important, will he immediately recognize the call from Squamish Nation to defer all old-growth logging in their territory so that the conversations about the future of that territory can go without chainsaws running in the background?
Premier,
Oh, sorry.
not yet. Oh, now.
Thank you.
Premier.
And again, I'm not telling anything to the leader of the third party that shouldn't already know. These are my neighbors. These are my constituents. This is an area that I've grown up in. We embraced all of the recommendations of the Gourlay-Merkel report, and we are working on implementing those recommendations. We deferred 200,000 hectares, and I appreciate that the member doesn't care for the math, but that's what we did, and we're going to defer more after consultation with Indigenous peoples. We were going to immediately defer the Central Walbrand, and we're asked by the Pachidat not to do that until they had had time to look at it. We've been in consultation for months and months, and gratefully, we've come to a conclusion whereby the Fairy Creek watershed as well as Central Walbrand have been deferred while the Pachidat and neighboring First Nations conduct their own integrated resource plans on what they want to do on their territory. We've also already begun discussions with the Squamish Nation. They have been going on for not as long a period of time as with the Pachidat, but they are well advanced, and I'm confident that we'll see positive outcomes there. But it requires consultation, it requires time, it requires human resources to do that. It's a big undertaking. Concurrent to that, we announced an intentions paper for mostly for the interior forest sector, which does also have old growth groves and species protected areas that should be protected for species that are at risk. As coastal dwellers, we oftentimes only assume that old growth is the majestic cedar and spruce that we know so well from southern Vancouver Island, but there are unique stands of old growth in the Kootenays and the Caribou, in and around the Prince George area. Unfortunately, well, I know that the Leader of the Opposition has a particular stand of old growth that was protected by the previous government just outside of Prince George, but they would not be considered majestic forests by the three of us because we come from here. All of that work requires concerted effort by government, by community, by workers, by not-for-profits, and by industry. And that's what we're undertaking. To make a seismic shift, and I'm paraphrasing Gary Merkel, but these are values that I share, and I know that the members on the opposite side share. If we're going to have a paradigm shift, it needs to have a strong foundation of buy-in from everyone, not just the loudest voice, not just those that choose to blockade, but those who want to move forward together. That's what we're trying to undertake. I would hope that, and I certainly would welcome, collaboration on these issues with my two friends from Southern Vancouver Island. We have the same objectives. There's a disagreement on time and pace, but I'm confident that if we keep at it, we're going to get to where British Columbians want us to be, protecting these majestic stands, protecting the biodiversity that comes with that. It's not just about the trees, it's about the animals, it's about the salmon, it's about the whole integrity of the bioregion. That's what we're committed to, that's what we've stood for, and that's what we're going to deliver.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. One question that my colleague is keen to hear an answer to, which is in the benefit agreements, Section 11 of these agreements indicate, Section 11, that once a nation has signed on to those, they cannot speak out against any of in these resource benefits agreements with forestry. That once a nation signed on, they cannot speak out against the activities that happen on the lands. Can the minister, or my apologies, can the Premier provide confidence that there will be no consequences or punishments for any nations that speak out against those agreements?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I'll undertake to get back to the member about the language in the impact benefit agreements. We had a technology failure for the subject matter expert on that question, but I will say, because I think this will be of equal interest to both of the members, we are working very constructively with the federal government, the Minister of Environment, on a nature fund, a significant fund. It's one of those I'll believe it when I see it things with the federal government. I see my former colleague from the House of Commons, he'll understand this full well, as well as the private sector and not-for-profits who are in the business of nature trusts and so on. So we're trying to bring all of these components to bear. I've heard through question period these types of models being referenced, and I want to just assure both members that we're very actively pursuing that. This is not about sign here and don't ever and forever hold your peace. But when you enter into an agreement, again, these are contractual arrangements. Party A and Party B agree to certain things. But certainly it's not the intention to muzzle. It's not the intention to not speak out. I would assume, and I expect and demand, that agreements are entered into freely and fairly. Free, prior, and informed consent is a component part of that. The member shaking his head in disagreement, that's the intent with which I offer the comment. And with that, Honourable Speaker, I move that the committee rise, report progress, and ask leave to sit again.